Our reality is fragile. Going through our day to day, we don't think about it or notice it. But then something happens that changes everything. Deja vu, remembering something different from someone else, or having a conversation that you had dreamt the night before. All it takes is one thing to show you that our individual reality is easily shattered and broken, like a rip through a blanket. Today's stories focus on glitches in our supposed reality. These stories show how fragile everything really is. Please remember to leave a like, comment, rating, and following wherever you're listening really helps me out. Now let's begin. I'm your host, Michael Messerly, and this is Scary but True. Back in September 2015, I was a freshman who had just entered high school 2 weeks prior. Already, school was weighing down on me, and I'd been continuing a habit I had of going on walks to clear my mind. On this day, I'd been walking around a pond near my house. There's a trail that goes around the pond, and then the trail leads up to a set of abandoned train tracks on the other side, which sit about 15 feet above the path and pond below. After walking the circle, I was crossing the train tracks when I decided I want some ice cream. The fastest way to get to the ice cream shop was to take the path below the train tracks, but there isn't any way to cross the pond without getting all the way back around. And being 14 years old, I decided that I could just jump from the tracks onto the path below and keep walking. Looking down from above, it didn't seem to be that far of a jump, so that's what I did. The next thing I remember after that was being half conscious in an ambulance. Everything was extremely blurry, and the paramedics sounded slightly panicked. I wasn't able to move either of my legs, so I think they were both broken. The scene continued on for a few minutes until we arrived at the hospital and I was wheeled into the emergency room on a stretcher. I only had a few minutes in the ER before I eventually lost all consciousness, and that was the last thing I saw. After I'd been unconscious for what felt like about an hour, I opened my eyes and I was on the ground. I just hit the ground after jumping, but this time I was fully conscious. I hadn't noticed this before I jumped, but there had been a car parked watching me. I think they thought I was attempting suicide, but it probably looked that way. And the people in it had jumped out and called an ambulance for me. The ambulance ride had been the exact same as it was the first time, and I was put into the same emergency room that I had died in before. The only difference between the two events were that I was fully conscious this time, and my injuries were much more minor. I was discharged from the hospital the same night with only stitches in my lip, a slightly fractured jaw, and a mild concussion. For a while after this, I assumed that the first scenario had just been a weirdly coincidental dream that I'd had while I was unconscious, so I didn't consider it anything abnormal. It wasn't until a few weeks after when my mom told me that the people who had helped me said that I had been conscious the entire time. I hadn't been knocked out after hitting the ground or anything, so that entire scenario managed to happen in a few seconds it took me to hit the ground while I was still conscious. Anyways, I'm not very good at describing things, especially with how blurry this day was now that it was years ago, but I'm 17 now, and I still have no way to explain what happened that day, other than I died and was given a second chance. This story has haunted me for a long time, and I've decided to make a throwaway count to tell it. My friend, Ian, for this story, and I had been on Cape Cod for 3 days, staying at my grandfather's beach house out on the Elbow. Nothing weird had happened, no drugs, a little drinking, some serious hangovers. This particular night, we started with some gin and tonics and with my mother before dinner. Dinner was normal. We had spent the day out meandering, visiting random nearby towns, played golf, and gone to a batting cage. We started drinking around 11 p.m. By 1 a.m. we had chatted, smoked a few cigarettes, and listened to music, the usual. We were drunk but not hammered, and decided to go outside for one last cigarette before bed. On the way out, we spotted my grandpa's collections of swords and knives on the wall of his garage. Being buzzed, young, and stupid, we decided, screw it, let's have a sword fight. Smart, right? We took a couple swords off the wall and began dueling immediately. A little clanging, and a few good laughs later, we found ourselves on the main road. It was empty at this hour, just a streetlight and the two of us dueling away. This is where things got weird. After a few more minutes of silly swordplay, we found ourselves in an intense battle. Soon, the battle turned from friendly idiocracy to something more intense. I have no idea what started it, but we were really having it out. I lunged, he lunged. Things escalated, and it was quickly out of hand. Then, out of nowhere, I got the better of him. I'm still not sure how it happened, but my final attack ended up being much more than I had bargained for. He went pale after my final thrust, and my hands shook as I released the sword. But it didn't hit the ground. I never meant it, but my sword ran straight through his abdomen. I stood there in disbelief, wondering how the fuck this happened. After what seemed like a forever of him moaning and me in shock, I ran for help. I rushed into the house yelling. My grandfather came out of his room and I told him to call 911. I then ran back to the street to stay with Ian until someone arrived. The police showed up first, then the ambulance. After they saw what had happened, we were rushed to the hospital and taken to the ICU, where we were split up and I was forced to wait. After a couple of strenuous hours, a doctor and a policeman entered the waiting room, and I expected the worst. I was right. He had died of massive internal bleeding and hemorrhaging in his liver. I went outside for a smoke, still trying to comprehend what had happened. Midway through my smoke, a man approached me from behind, asking for a light. I nodded, took out my lighter, and then faced the man. The man I faced wasn't whom I expected. It was Ian. He looked at me, puzzled at my hesitation and shock. I lit his cigarette, speechless and immensely confused. "You alright, queer?" he said. I looked around, and we were back on the main street, swords in hand. "Let's fight, pussy." He swung his sword around in the air, then smacked me on the arm, jolting me back into reality. I took a drag of my cigarette, picked up my sword, and parried his second swing. I wasn't myself and he knew it, so we went back to the house, watched TV, and passed out. I didn't tell him what I had seen until years later, and even then he didn't believe me. He still teases me about murdering my best bud and calls me the swordsman whenever we drink together. And that's my glitch. If you're enjoying Scary But True, please remember to leave a like, comment, rating, and shoot me a follow wherever you're listening, as that really helps me out. Thank you so much for listening. Now back to the episode. Near where I grew up, there was a large amusement park. One half of it was rides and coasters. The other half was a water park. Obviously, the summer jobs there were a great pull when you were a teenager, and they employed a huge number of my friends on summer break from college. The jobs over in the water park were generally considered more desirable, although I was never able to get them because I'm a horrible swimmer. Basically, the water park opened later and closed earlier, so the shifts were nicer, and they had to pay you more because you had to be the first aid and CPR lifeguard certified. A lot of my friends worked there, and I knew about 3 people involved in this story. It started at a water slide, one of the huge tube slides that you had to walk up 7 flights of steps to get to the top. One lifeguard was posted up top, telling people when to go down, and one of my friends was the lifeguard at the bottom, who helped people off the slide, and gave the all clear for the next person to go. A family had come with their child, who was very young, and apparently barely the height limit to go on the ride. The family was in line with the father first, kid second, and mother last, so that someone would be with the kid both at the top and bottom of the slide. The father goes down the slide, gets off, and the lifeguard gives the all clear, and waits. He can't really see what's going on up top, but finally the next rider comes down. It's the mother, who walks over to the father and asks where their son is. There's a moment of confusion, and my friend is pulled over by the family. The kid had been the next one to enter the slide up top before his mother, but had never come out the bottom. My friend is confused, calls up to the top lifeguard, who verifies that the kid had went down the slide. Neither my friend nor the father saw the kid come out of the bottom. Until this is figured out, they shut down the slide. The top lifeguard calls security and reports that there's a child missing, while my friend calls a supervisor. The supervisor shows up and apparently is afraid the kid is wedged in the tube somehow, and in such a way that the mother failed to dislodge him coming down the slide. The way that she said it was apparently obvious she was assuming some injury to be involved. The parents are obviously upset at this point and freaking out, and the super has the upper lifeguard go down the ride himself, spread out to make sure there's no child jammed in the turns of the slide. He comes out of the bottom, having not dislodged the corpse of the child, and everyone is more confused than ever. Meanwhile, security called, saying they just turned up a missing kid near one of the coasters. Could they get a description of the child missing? The super sort of dismisses it out of hand that it could have been the same child. The coaster they found the kid by was clear across the park, and the child was only missing for a few minutes at this point. Instead, she has a bunch of lifeguards run up the stairs and come down the slide, still hoping to dislodge the kid, while other employees quietly look around the bottom in case the kid somehow managed to fall out of the tube. Meanwhile, upper management is called in, as the parents of the kid are alternating between yelling and blaming each other, panicking, and threatening to sue the park. Upper management calls security and asks them to pull the security camera footage from the top of the slide to try to figure out what happened. A kid a few years ahead of me in high school happened to be working security, and he was there when they pulled the footage, and one of the security guards says that he is almost positive that's the kid they have in the next room. They get the kid's name, and sure enough, he's in the missing children's room, safe and sound. Here's where things get weird. The footage shows the father, kid, and mother entering the slide. It's also time-stamped, so they know when the child went down the slide. The incident report for when the kid was found clear across the park behind a roller coaster shows he was discovered less than 5 minutes later. If you've ever noticed, nothing in an amusement park is laid out linearly. There's always fences and bushes and buildings between you and where you want to go. The idea is to make you ramble about between rides to cut down on ride wait time. My friend, the security guard, tested it, and walking at a stiff clip and knowing all the shortcuts, it was a 20-minute walk for him. Furthermore, when you hit the edge of the water park, there were signs that shirts and shoes had to be worn past that point. If you saw anyone, even a kid, walking past there without them, you were to detain them. The kid was found barefoot and shirtless in just his swim trunks. The idea that no one across the 12 acres would stop this kid who, to travel that far, had to be running, and ask him to put on appropriate clothing is completely weird. Weirdest of all was that the incident report stated that the child seemed disoriented and was at first not able to respond to questions. It also stated that the kid, who was in a water slide 5 minutes prior, was bone dry. This was the talk of the park for about a week, with everyone trying to come up with explanations. Guards searching the other security footage to try to find the kid going across the park, people trying to get from the slide to the coaster, etc. Then the upper management came out and basically hushed it up. Supervisors told that if they heard anyone talking about it, that they would be fired. Pretty soon the park moved on to whatever the next drama was and it got swept aside. But yeah, child goes down slide and into time and space portal. Since we're talking about disappearing and reappearing objects, here's mine. I'm pretty skeptical and I write off a lot of posts as forgetfulness. I love you guys, but maybe you just ate that last slice of pizza or your friends were pranking you. This is measurable and corroborated. So let's begin the timeline. Night 1. 10 years ago, around 9 p.m., I'm sitting in my apartment with one of my best friends. We decide to get food from the diner down the block. I tell my friend, I'll buy if you fly, so I hand him my debit card which was in my wallet. He gets the food and gives me back the card which goes back in the wallet and back in my pocket. Hour or two later, he leaves while the wallet is still in my back pocket. I always leave my wallet in my pants so I know where to look for it the next day. The next morning, I wake up, go through my routine as usual, but my wallet isn't in my pants. I'd ransacked the whole place because I knew it must be somewhere. I even checked the kitchen garbage to make sure we got food the night before and the receipt verified it. Even if my friend had kept my card, which he didn't, where the hell was my wallet? I call my mom and get a ride to work since I didn't have money or my bus pass. At this point, I'm so shocked that I couldn't find it, but I don't cancel my cards because I was certain it was misplaced in my house. I get home that night and continue the search. It's not in my house. It's a small studio apartment anyways. Day 2. Wallet still missing, and a disappointed mother provided me with a ride to work again and a scolding for being so irresponsible. I tell her I'm off the next 2 days and I'll find it, no worries. Day 3. Day off, futile searching continues. Nothing. Day 4. I'm awoken by a phone call from my mom. She tells me that some nice woman found my wallet and returned it to her. My ID still had my mom's address since I moved into my first apartment earlier that year, so she went there instead of to my new place. My mom said that the lady found it outside of her job, wedged in a flower pot, a block from the train line. All my credit cards were intact, and I had $60 cash in the wallet still. Here's where it gets absolutely inexplicable. The weirdest part is where she works and where she found it. She works 4 miles from my apartment, and even crazier, she was the front desk person at an old hotel that converted to studio and one-bedroom apartments that I took a tour of 9 months previously. Side note, meaning I almost lived there, or perhaps did, in an alternate reality. She said that she was walking towards the train and for some reason her intuition told her to look into the concrete flower bed. I went and checked it out, and it's an odd setup. The concrete pot is square and the pot holding the dirt is circular. There was just enough space to wedge my wallet where the square meets the circle. And she said it was impossible to notice since it was an all-black wallet next to a black planter, unless you looked right at it. She picked it up and decided to take the train and bus 5 miles and dropped it off personally at my mom's house. I've told that story at a few parties, and after 10 years, no one can think of an even reasonable explanation. This story took place about 5 years ago, and every single word of it is 100% true. To this day, my family and I still can't explain what happened. My mom, dad, and 2 sisters went on a family trip across Europe. I stayed at home with my husband and 12-month-old baby. It's 3 a.m. and my phone's ringing. It's my dad. I'm thinking, that's weird. Dad's usually well aware of what time it is here when he calls. Maybe he doesn't realize? So I ignore it. My phone rings again. Now I'm thinking it's someone urgent and I should answer, but it rings out before I can pick it up. I then notice I have a dozen missed calls from both my mom and dad, and my sisters. I also have a heap of messages, so now I'm wide awake and thinking the absolute worst. I open up the text messages and they're all along the lines of, everything will be okay, we are going to get to the next flight home to be with you, stay strong, we love you. I'm thinking, what the hell are they on about? My phone rings again and I answer straight away. What the hell is going on, Dad? What do all those text messages mean? Now it takes a lot to make my dad concerned. On the phone, he's really concerned and trying to keep his shit together. Through gritted teeth and his voice shaking, he says, I've just been on the phone with you for an hour. What do you mean, what's going on? I'm completely dumbfounded. I went to bed at 10 p.m. and have been fast asleep until now. The last time I spoke with my parents was 3 days ago. How could I have possibly been on the phone with my dad for the last hour? I tell him he must be confused. I've been asleep and definitely didn't make any phone calls. Don't play games with me, my dad almost shouts. I've been on the phone with you for the last hour consoling you because you've just found out you're pregnant and your husband has left you. What? At this point, my husband has woken up to all the commotion and is asking what's going on. Dad, what are you talking about? He's right here, asleep next to me. He hasn't walked out on me and I'm definitely not pregnant. Dad's angry now, telling me to stop bullshitting him and that this isn't funny. He's demanding I tell him the truth, asking if both me and my son are okay and how do I know where my husband has gone. At this point, I'm thinking I've been sleep talking. I've somehow called my dad in my sleep and told him this ridiculous story. My husband doesn't believe it. He's saying he would have woken up to me crying on the phone to my dad if I had in fact done that in my sleep. I tell my dad to hang on a minute while I check if I made any calls to him. I look through my phone log, and apart from multiple missed calls, I haven't made any calls to my dad or my family for that matter. The last phone call received was 3 days ago. I checked my husband's phone in case I somehow clambered over him and used his phone to make the ridiculous phone call, and nothing. Dad, I've just checked my phone. I haven't made any calls to you. I asked my dad if my caller ID showed up when I called him. He says he can't remember, so he checks. A minute or so later, he says, it says unknown. I haven't received any calls from your phone number. My dad is suspicious now, thinking who the hell did he just speak to? My bewilderment turns to anger. Has someone pranked my dad? Who would make up such a story and upset my whole family? My dad denies it, saying he knows my voice and says it was definitely me. Even my sister got on the phone and she said she was there the whole time, talking with me while I was in hysterics on the phone. She said that I had told them that my husband got angry and walked out on me when I told him I was pregnant. I didn't know where he went and he wasn't answering my calls. I said I was scared to be home by myself with my son, so I went to stay with a friend. My sisters said she could hear my friend in the background, but I wouldn't tell them which friend I was staying with when they asked. My dad asked me why I didn't go to his house, as I still have a key, and I said I didn't want to because of their family friend who was staying there, which was a true piece of information. My mom and dad had a family friend staying with them for a few months and was looking after their house while they were traveling. My sisters said eventually I calmed down, and I said I had to go as I didn't want to keep my friend awake any longer. I said I have to go to work the next day and need to cancel my dentist appointment, another true piece of information. I was in fact called into work the following day and I had told my husband the night before I'll need to cancel my dentist appointment. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. At that same time, my family couldn't believe what I was telling them otherwise. I had to take a photo of me and my husband to prove to them everything was fine and none of that happened. We stayed on the phone with each other till 6 in the morning, me convincing them that they definitely did not have to get on the next flight home. No one could make sense of what had happened. My dad and family still didn't 100% believe me until they got home from Europe and saw me in the flesh. We speak about it every now and again. I always ask my dad and sister to tell me again and again exactly what I said to them over the phone. I find it fascinating and terrifying at the same time. My dad doesn't like talking about it. He just shakes his head and says, "I don't know what to believe," and I don't blame him. What he and my family heard was real. They really were on the phone to me and were all devastated at what I was telling them, ready to jump on the next flight home and telling me to stay strong. Imagine then being told a few minutes later by the real me that I had no idea what they were talking about. I have always loved the outdoors. I was fortunate enough to be born in the Great Pacific Northwest, the Western Washington Cascades to be exact. My father and I spent much of my early years of life exploring the mountains, fishing, and hunting. There are parts of the Cascades I know like the back of my hand. One of those places is called Goblin Creek, up the Index Galima Road off Highway 2. When I was a kid, we would drive up there to do some fishing and shooting, but also to collect a specific type of rock that when cut in half and polished would resemble a scenic picture of the view of the mountains from within a cave. I do not recall the true name of these stones, we just called them picture rocks. My father, friend, and neighbor owned an art gallery and mineral shop that used to be a church. If you have ever driven through Startup on your way from Sultan to Gold Bar on Highway 2, you might remember seeing the robot sculpture outside the shop that my dad built. This is the place that we sold the stone for $2 a pound. It was lucrative revenue for a preteen. The walk from the creek where we harvested these rocks to the dirt road wasn't particularly long, but lengthy enough that you could presumably get lost while en route if one didn't know where to go. In the years we spent at this creek, I had only ever seen 2 other people out there. One was a game warden that heard the gunshots from our target practice session and tracked us down to make sure everything was okay. The other is the subject of my curiosity. When I was about 14, I distinctly remember hauling a backpack full of these rocks up from the creek to my dad's truck. Along the way, I ran into a man that looked to be about 30 years old. We both appeared to be surprised that we would run into one another in this rather remote section of the mountains, but as I got closer to this man, he was heading down to the creek, I was heading up the road. He seemed to grow increasingly more startled, as if he was seeing a ghost. He didn't say anything as I passed. He just stared at me, seemingly trying to figure out the appropriate words to ask me something. After passing him, I remember thinking how much this guy looked like he could be in my family. The similarities were striking. I continued onto the truck, dumped my load of rock off at the truck, and headed back down to the river to my dad. When I arrived, I told him about the encounter and asked him if he had seen this man, to which he replied that he hadn't. I have remembered this encounter for quite vividly since then. Last year, I was visiting my family in Snohomish and decided to head up to Old Goblin Creek for nostalgic purposes. It had been about 15 years since I was last up there. Along the way up there, I found out that the Index Galima Road had apparently washed out years before. Luckily, I knew another way up there via Jack's Pass. I found the dirt road and parked where my dad used to park and proceeded to walk through the woods down to the creek. Along the way, I saw something that absolutely shook me to the core. As I was about halfway through the woods, I was startled to see someone else coming up from the creek. A boy, about 14 years old. He was wearing a backpack that looked to be burdened by heavy weights. As we got closer, I began to get increasingly confused and shocked as the boy looked exactly like I did at his age. I meant to say something to him as he passed, but could not figure out the right words to express what I was thinking at the moment. He passed me and kept going. I walked a little ways and finally stopped when it really hit me. I remembered the encounter from my teenage years and realized I had just lived the other half of the experience. Both the man and the boy were me, roughly 15 years removed. I turned around to catch up to the boy in the thick western Washington woods. I ran all the way back up the road where my truck was to find. Nothing. There wasn't anywhere else besides the road for him to go to, and I hadn't stalled so long as to not be able to catch up to him. He was simply gone. Curiosity got the best of me, so I hurried down to the creek, half expecting to find my dad fishing on the bank 15 years younger, but found nobody. This morning, I wrecked my car. It was such a silly way to wreck it, but it happened. I started up a hill, and there was a truck and trailer turning up a hill in front of me. I was a good few car lengths behind him until I slowed down, because he was moving slowly. He quickly made the turn, I sped up, and then he stopped suddenly, leaving the trailer sitting out in the road. I slammed on my brakes and tried to stop, but still ended up sliding into him. The next couple seconds were a bit blurry, but I remember seeing the front of my car slam into the trailer, and the part of the trailer that comes down to drive vehicles, lawnmowers, or whatever upon to it, came through my windshield. The whole crash only lasted a few seconds, but I know my car had went under the end of the trailer, jarring the piece loose and it swinging into my windshield, hitting me in the face. The next thing I remember is feeling the metal slam into my face and tasting blood. My face hurt badly, and my 2-year-old was screaming in the back seat. My head was hurting worse than any pain I'd ever felt, but I had to make sure he was okay. I laid my seat back enough to twist and look around him. He was safely buckled in his car seat and had no signs of injury. He was obviously just as scared as he had been asleep a few minutes prior to this. When he saw my face, he screamed louder and started crying even more. He was screaming, "Mommy, Mommy," through sobs. He was crying so hard he was going silent between breaths. The last thing I remember is hearing the guy I hit calling an ambulance. As I drifted off, I could hear my baby screaming, but I didn't have the strength to get to him. The next thing I know, I'm waking up in a panic, and my eyes pop open, and I'm hitting the trailer again. This time it was different. The trailer twisted up and swung in the opposite direction, throwing a riding lawnmower off into a ditch. I quickly turned around, and my 2-year-old was still asleep in the back seat. I was so confused and scared. My first thought was that I had died and I was stuck in a loop of crashing into this trailer. I know how silly that sounds, but that was the first conclusion in my mind gathered. I stood there dumbfounded for what seemed like forever until I heard the guy I hit telling me to please say something or he was calling 911. I turned to him and told him I was fine. There wasn't a scratch on me and my 2-year-old was sleeping peacefully in the back seat. This time, several things were different. Instead of hitting him directly front and center of my car, I only hit him on the driver's side, and I wasn't injured at all. Not a single scratch where previously my face had been hit, and I felt pains in different parts of my body. There were vehicles stopped behind me, and things continued as they normally would after a wreck. The cops were called, and they started cleaning up the accident. The lady in the car behind me finally got out and came to ask if my little guy and I wanted to sit in her car until it was all done. I declined and she asked if I was sure I was okay. She said she just knew I'd be hurt because she saw the trailer come through my windshield. When she looked at the front of my car and saw my windshield still intact, she too was dumbfounded. I don't know if this was a glitch, divine intervention, or a coincidence. Did my mind simply fill in the blanks and she perceived the accident differently than what had actually happened? I don't know, but I'm so very thankful my baby and I are both unharmed. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please leave a like, review, or a comment. As always, the original stories are linked down in the description below, and I claim no credit for the stories themselves. Be sure to follow the show everywhere at Scary But True Pod. And if you have your own scary story that you'd like me to share, email it to me at scarybutTruePod@gmail.com. My name is Michael Messerly, and I'll see you next time with more Scary But True.